Good evening. For those of you in the audience who have not attended one of these hearings recently, let me review our normal procedure. Staff will introduce each item for consideration. If you'd like to speak, please fill out the speaker form located on the table in the lobby and indicate the item number and whether you are for or against the item. Please give the form to the clerk seated on my left. The applicant and supporters will be heard first. Those in opposition to the request will be heard next. Then the applicant may be given a chance for rebuttal if necessary. Comments should be restricted to pertinent information regarding the agenda item under discussion. If you're an individual, you will have 3 minutes for comments. If you're speaking on behalf of a group, you will have 6 minutes for comments. Speakers should move closer to the podium when their item is being presented by staff. Speakers should identify themselves clearly for the record by stating their name and address. Each speaker should be given respectful and courteous attention. The board may ask questions of speakers or staff members. Information such as pictures, site plans, letters, etc., presented at the public hearing will be kept as part of the public record. If there's something you have on your cell phone that you want to show us, you have to promise to send it to the clerk after the hearing. Otherwise, they have to keep your cell phone, and you probably don't want to give that to the county. I would then ask for a motion from the board. Once a motion has been made and seconded, discussion will be closed to the floor. Following board discussion, a vote will be taken. During voting, board members who do not cast objecting votes are considered to have voted in support of the motion. Any person aggrieved by any decision of the Board of Adjustment may, within 15 days, file an appeal to the Board of County Commissioners through the Planning and Development Division of the Development Services Department. Okay, we're ready for our first item.
For the record, Angie Gates, item number 1 is a request for a side yard west setback variance from 7.5 feet to 5 feet for a garage in the R1A Single Family Dwelling District located in Lake Ridge Park subdivision at 402 South Street. The existing 418 square foot garage was built in 1976 and encroaches 2.5 feet into the minimum required side yard west setback. A single-family dwelling permit was applied for, permit number 23-1681, and the residence and existing garage will be attached. There haven't been any prior variances for the subject property, and this concludes my presentation.
Okay, any questions for staff? Yes, sir, Mr. Adderley?
Is there an existing code enforcement action on this property?
No.
And do we know the history of how, I mean, was there a remainder of a house that was
I think
excluded?
that this lot was combined with the neighboring lot at one point and then separated at some
Gotcha.
point. So that's why it exists. They want to keep the garage, but they have to attach it.
Gotcha. Thank you, ma'am.
You're welcome.
Okay, any other questions for staff? Okay. Is the applicant present? Is there anything you would like to add to staff comments? Come on down. Please state your name and address for the record.
Kyle Danziger, 402 South Street. So basically, we're just trying to build on to that existing garage, a single-family home. And we've already talked to both neighbors, and they seem fine with it after the conversations I've had. We talked to our engineer, who did the civil plans and also went out to site to verify if that garage would be good, and they said it was structurally sound, so we're looking to get that, this variance approved. That's all.
Okay. Any questions for the applicant? All right, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else to speak in support of the request? Is there anyone to speak in opposition to the request? Do we have a motion?
Move to approve, Mr. Chair.
Second.
Motion to approve is second. Any discussion? All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's carried, approved. Good luck. All right, next item.
Item number 2 is a request for a side street south setback variance from 15 feet to 10 feet for a fence in the planned development district located in the Riverbend at Cameron Heights Phase 4 subdivision at 2082 Apalachicola Lane. The subject property is a corner lot and considered to have 2 front yards for setback purposes. The front of the house faces Apalachicola Lane. The Twin Flower Lane street side is where the variance is being sought. Traffic engineering has no objection to the placement of the fence as it relates to site visibility. The Cameron Heights Homeowners Association has approved the proposed location of the fence. 5 letters of support were received from adjacent neighbors. And the proposed privacy fence will be 10 feet from the sidewalk and 20.5 feet from the edge of pavement. And this concludes my presentation.
Okay, any questions for staff? Okay, is the applicant present? Yes, sir. Is there anything you would like to add? Come on down. Please state your name and address for the record.
Sure. Satya Harihara Subramanian, 2082 Apalachicola Lane, Sanford. Basically, we need to, set this fence a little bit more. For privacy reasons, I have a toddler and a newborn at home. So for them to have some backyard to play. So that was the first reason. And there is an adjacent house who got their variance approved already. And there are like multiple properties in the community who have extended the fence till 10 feet. We have approval letter from all our adjacent neighbors, and we are hoping to get this thing approved here as well.
Okay. Any questions for the applicant? Okay, thank you. Is there anyone to speak in support of the request? Is there anyone to speak in opposition to the request? Do we have a motion?
Mr. Chair, can I have a question for staff?
Yes.
I did see the fences as well. Where was that previously granted by this board?
Which fence?
Anything in that area?
Yes.
There was a variance granted?
Specifically, yes.
Back seat, side street, forward?
Side street.
Side street, setback? Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? All right. Do we have a motion?
Move to approve.
A motion to approve, do we have a second?
Second.
Second, any discussion? All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Good luck. All right, next item.
Item number 3 is a request for a side yard west setback variance from 10 feet to 8 feet for a pool enclosure in the PD Plan Development District located in the Sweetwater Oaks Section 15 subdivision at 104 Crestwood Drive. The replacement pool screen enclosure that was built in 1976 will not exceed the existing footprint. It's 1,087.2 square feet and encroaches 2 feet into the side yard west setback. Letters of support were received from 2 of the adjacent neighbors, and there have not been any prior variances for the subject property. And this concludes my presentation.
Thank you. Any questions for staff? Is the applicant present? Sir. Good evening. Please state your name and address.
D.C. Johnson, 1400 South Ronald Reagan Boulevard, Longwood.
Sir, what would you like to tell us?
Just would like for the board to know that this there was an existing cage there for 46 years in the exact same spot. When this comes up and it gets kicked back, then the first thing we look at is what can we do to keep from circumvent the variance process? And the only thing to make it happen was to cut off the corner of the pool enclosure that you'd be able to see in the discovery, that the pics in the discovery that I sent, that it would cut off the corner of would come to the water's edge. So there would be no ingress egress around the side of the pool. So that's why, and since it is a corner lot, they've only got 2 neighbors and both of them they sent letters in of approval.
Okay. Do you have any questions? All right, thank you, sir. Is there anyone to speak in support of the request? Is there anyone to speak in opposition to the request? We have a motion.
Mr. Chair,
Sir.
move to approve.
Motion to approve, do we have a second?
Second?
Have a second, any discussion? All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries, it's approved. Good luck to you, sir. All right, next item?
Item number 4 is a request for a front yard south setback variance from 100 feet to 44 feet for an accessory dwelling unit in the A1 Agricultural District located at 2838 Red Bug Lake Road. The existing accessory dwelling unit is 500 square feet and encroaches 56 feet into the required front yard setback. No building permits were found on record for the accessory dwelling unit, so a building permit will be required. There have not been any prior variances for the subject property, and this concludes my presentation.
Okay. Any questions for staff? Yes, sir.
How did this come to y'all's attention?
I think we got a complaint, but I could be wrong. There isn't
So it's
a,
not like the applicant applied for something, it's just somehow it came to staff's attention that
Yes.
it's in violation, and here we are.
right, there wasn't a code violation number submitted with the application, and usually staff, that's documented, but I can't say for sure that there
Fair
isn't.
enough, fair enough. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, any other questions for staff? All right. Sir, are you the applicant?
Yes.
Now, come on down, I can see you wanted to say something. Please state your name and address for the record.
My name's Clay Wooten. I'm the contractor. Wooten Built is representing the owners of 2838 Red Bug Lake Road. They purchased this property and asked me to come in and do some remodeling work. This accessory building, we have photos of it as well, was already existing. It had plumbing, electric, very old box. The electrical panel was from the 60s. A broken septic system on the south side of it. And, you know, he wanted to convert it to use it for, you know, as his office. And, you know, it needed some work done, so we're not going to be expanding or changing the dimensions of it or raising it at all. I just told him in order for me to do the work on it, we needed to get it permitted. Or get it on record so that we can do the permits we need to get the work done on it. So it's a very secluded lot. It's a it's not really a flag lot. It just has a long, you can see that long, it's set back there. There's lots of woods there between them and the other properties. Aesthetically, wouldn't affect the neighbors at all. We're not really doing anything other than we'd like to, you know, maybe add another window or two into the unit. But really, the majority of the work, I mean, it's just a building is there. I don't even know, I have no idea why it's not even on public record, because it should be. It's on the survey that we have, and it's existing. It's probably an older building than the current one. But again, we're not going to tear it down. We're not going to remove the walls. We're not going to remove the roof. We just want to bring it up to, you know, fix it up, bring it up to code so they can use it.
Okay. Well, I'd like to commend you for telling them they need to get a permit, because we get them all the time, where, especially fences, where there are suddenly in front of us for something that wasn't supposed to be built.
Right. And there was no complaint, by the way.
Right.
This is
You were just-
initiated
okay.
on my council.
I just want it was submitted as an accessory dwelling unit, so I don't know, you're stating that it's an office?
Well, it's going to be set, he wants to, but it has a full...
Completely different, so we need
Well,
to...
it currently, it had a kitchen and a bathroom in it as well, so, and it would be a dwelling unit, yes.
Let me ask a question. If it's going to be used as an office, does that have to change the posting? Are there different requirements for an office than a accessory dwelling unit?
Setbacks will be the same. I actually would consider the office to be less intense than an accessory dwelling unit. So we have the setbacks correct, the size of it correct. I think it's just,
So that would be a permitting issue after that? Okay.
To be clear, he wants to use it for guests to reside there too, to have a place. He wants to temporarily, have his office out there, but have it set up to where there's a small kitchen.
I just want to make sure we advertised it
Okay,
correctly, and we don't have you
I
back
understand.
here in a month going,
I get you, yeah.
okay. Any questions for the applicant's representative? All right, thank you, sir. Is there anyone else to speak in support of the request?
Mr. Chair, I changed my mind. I'm sorry, could I ask the gentleman a question?
Absolutely.
I'm sorry, I'm very slow on the uptake. Do you have, and this may be an unfair question, catching you flat-footed, do you know whether historically it had been used as a dwelling unit?
Yes, it definitely has.
Okay.
And it still has the plumbing inside, it was a bathroom, had a kitchen in there, it didn't have the 240 for the extra stove, but it was, but yeah, I mean, it definitely had been.
It's not like, so it was not like it was a storage shed or anything like that?
No.
or-
It absolutely,
Yeah.
currently has the old plumbing and electrical and everything in place, and the place where the toilet, where the cabinets and sink were, everything.
Gotcha. Thank you, sir.
Sure.
I mean, Red Bug Road in the 60s in a wooded area, somebody built it, nobody never noticed.
No one there, yeah.
So, okay. Is there anyone else to speak in support of the request? Is there anyone to speak in opposition to the request? We have a motion.
I move to approve.
Motion to approve, do we have a second?
Second?
We have a second, any discussion? All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries, it's approved, good luck to you.
Thank you.
All right, next item.
Good evening, Larry Payton, Planning and Development. Item number 5 is a variance request for 2805 Orono Way located in the Bear Lake Estates subdivision. The request is for a rear yard setback reduction from 30 feet to 9 feet for an accessory dwelling unit in the R1 AA zoning district. The request is to convert an existing non-conforming 600 square foot detached garage into an accessory dwelling unit, which encroaches 21 feet into the 30-foot rear yard setback. This concludes my presentation. I'm available for any questions.
Any questions for staff? Okay, is the applicant present? Is there anything you would like to add, sir? Yeah, absolutely, come on down. Please state your name and address for the record.
My name is Juventino Leos, 8091 Peaceful Circle, Sanford. Jose buy this property with the existing detached garage, which is just a shell. Now he applied for to do a permit to finish the inside, turning into the livable space. Then we realized that it's out of the code because the setback. That's the reason of this variance application.
Okay. Has he talked to his neighbor behind him,
Do you talk to
closest to the garage?
No, I don't think so. No, that's cool. No. We installed the placard required by the board, but not necessarily with the neighbors.
Okay. Any questions for the applicant's representative? All right, thank you. Is there anyone to speak in support of the request? Is there anyone to speak in opposition to the request? We have a motion.
Mr. Chair, motion to approve.
Motion to approve, do we have a second?
Second.
Second, any discussion? All in favor of the motion, say aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion carries, it's approved. Good luck.
Thank you.
All right, next item?
I'm not receiving, I'm sorry.
You'll receive a letter. You're welcome. Item number 6 is a variance request for 3484 Scout Lake Lane, located in the Carillon subdivision. This request is for a rear yard setback reduction from 20 feet to 14.33 feet for a screen room addition in the Carillon Plan Development. The request is to construct a 528 square foot screen room addition, 5.67 feet into the required 20-foot rear yard setback. The Carillon Community Residential Association has approved the request. An email was received today from the rear affected neighbor opposing the request. The email has been placed on the dais for your consideration. This concludes my presentation. I'm available for any questions.
Questions for staff?
I have a question, Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir.
Looking at the aerial exhibit in our package, the screen enclosure for the pool that's diagonally across from the proposed lot, do we know if that property has variance?
They don't
Looks
need a
like-
variance for it. Screen enclosures only have a 5-foot rear yard setback. And then the placement of where they're planning on putting the screen room with a solid roof addition, it would be too close to that property line.
So, okay, I'm just, maybe I asked the wrong question, because on the site plan, it says the blue shaded area is a proposed screen structure. So is this different than a screen enclosure?
A screen enclosure has a screen roof, whereas a screen room has a solid roof. And so they have different setbacks.
Different setbacks, thank you.
You're welcome.
That clarifies my question, thank you.
Good question.
All right. So there's a screen room or a screen porch there now that they want to turn into a screen room with a
It's just
solid.
a concrete pad, I believe now. that they
Okay, I was
want.
looking at the picture. It looked like there was a grid over it.
No, I think they're adding a whole new structure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got a question too for the homeowner.
Okay.
That's the existing.
Oh, next to it. I missed that. I was looking there. Okay. All right, is the applicant present? Come on down, sir. You're the next contestant. Please state your name and address for the record.
Good evening. My name is John Staines, 3484 Scout Lake Lane.
Okay. What would you like to add to the staff presentation?
So I learned the same thing that Mr. Wright was just pointing out, that once there's an impervious roof, the setback is different than if it were a screen roof. It truly is a screen room. It's still aluminum construction. It'll look like a pool cage, except for it would have insulated metal roof panel, so it would provide shade. Because the rear property line is down by the lake and our other property line is at an angle, I was under the impression that I would fall under a side lot setback, and it was actually permitted that way. And then we started construction and we changed contractors, and the new contractor applied for permit and it was rejected. And so it was approved in error under the first permit, and so then we had to stop and go through this variance process. So I would just note that we only need the variance for that corner of the addition, but because the property line goes back at an angle, it falls within that 20-foot rather quickly, but it does need it on that corner.
Okay. The trapezoidal lots, those funky shapes, are measured differently.
Right.
I was relying on staff to tell us how they measure it. So it's understandable. Okay, do we have any questions for the applicant?
I do. How tall?
So the sidewalls, 10 feet, and the peak, 14 feet.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone to speak in support of the request? Is there anyone to speak in opposition to the request? Do we have a motion?
Mr. Chair, motion to approve.
A motion to approve, do we have a second?
Mr. Chair, I'll second for discussion purposes.
Okay. All right, go for it, sir.
This sucks, in the sense that we've got an applicant who's trying to do things the right way.
Right.
And boy, we have contractors in the past come in and do things that we know are not straightforward. But there's part of me that says, I'm sympathetic to folks who have investment-backed expectations in their property rights, and they want the rules upheld. Then part of me says, it's a 6-foot change, and goodness, and should we, is it, I'm throwing this out there, is it worth perhaps discussing with our applicant of continuing it to see if he can work out some settlement with his neighbor? Yeah, I mean, if the board approves it, the board approves it, but
I mean, I see what you're saying. I also kind of agree is that it is that weird, funky shape, Mr. Chairman, that you were speaking of. And he is doing it the right way, which, is a huge plus, but which way it should be done. But then again, you still have the tenants, the property owner's rights that has clearly asked for it to be denied, and they have rights as well. So it's like, I'm also kind of 50-50 on this. Mr. Chair, is there any way that could happen, that possibly going back?
Let me ask you, sir, can you come back up to the microphone? I have a question, sir. Had you talked to the neighbor that's in opposition?
No, we haven't. I honestly didn't think that neighbor would have a problem. I thought it would be the neighbor next to them, because myself and the neighbor that sent an email today, we both have lake access or lakefront property. I thought it would have been the other neighbor, which had no issue, and I thought they might have. I didn't think to talk to the other neighbor, and so I got the email today that there was opposition. I was surprised. I would add that I failed to mention earlier, we do have HOA approval, so we did go through that process, and the ARB had no issue with what we were doing.
Oh, I appreciate that. Would you be willing to continue this to next month and give you a chance to talk to them, see if you could work this out, and then?
We are, if I
It's
have
up to
to, I
you.
will. We are so far behind schedule because we
Okay.
had to stop.
I mean, if we approve it, there's a good chance he could appeal it, and you end up in front of the Board of County Commissioners anyway, so it's up to you. if you're not seeking a continuance, then I'm not going to recommend a continuance. So,
Yeah, I'd rather not seek one. I wish to not seek a continuance.
okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, he does not want a continuance, so.
Mr. Chair, just continue on the discussion. I look at this and I recognize that by our definition, we're using a rear lot line for the setback on this, when the properties contiguous to them are basically all within the same setback for their enclosures, whether you call them roofed or not. The building to the left is, same thing, is all very similar. It's in this case, I would be looking at it that the lot configuration is unique to this lot, and it isn't standard, and I'm not objecting to continuing and looking at it from this perspective that, it's in concert with other dwellings on the adjacent side, so.
Right, yeah, those odd-shaped lots are always an issue when they come up. We don't see them all that often, but when they do, they're every time.
Yeah, it's difficult.
It's easier when the neighbors don't care, but when you have somebody who's objecting, he has property rights and expectations as well, so what's the balance, so to speak? So he doesn't want to continue it. He'd rather have a decision and deal with an appeal if he has to, so I think we owe it to him. It's his dollar. He's paid for the hearing. So why make him wait any longer than he has to? Any other discussion? All right, so we have a motion to approve the request. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
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 Aye. All opposed?
Aye.
All right, the motion passes 3-1. It is approved, okay? So you can proceed, but there's probably a good chance he's going to appeal it to the Board of County Commission, and then you can have fun doing this again. All right, good luck to you. All right, next item.
Item number 7, Kathy Hamill. This is a variance request for ground-mounted solar panels at 101 Caspian Cove, in which it was discovered after they were constructed that they did not meet zoning regulations. It was brought to our attention from a neighbor's complaint, and we further reviewed the building permit that the panels did not receive zoning approval. originally submitted from the applicant was for roof-mounted panels, in which that application wouldn't have gone to zoning review because it would be the same thing as a roof permit. But what had happened is the request changed to ground-mounted panels, in which those are considered to be structures, especially ones that are 980 square feet and up to 15 feet high. We define that as a structure under our code, therefore it must meet all zoning setbacks and regulations. Unfortunately, it was brought to zoning, and so the applicant proceeded to construct the solar panels. Understanding that the county shares the burden of this oversight, staff did meet with the applicant to discuss the options. One of the options is to move the solar panels, but the applicant says that that's not financially feasible, and actually moving them back isn't going to decrease the visibility of the panels from adjacent neighbors. So the resolution to this was for them to ask for a variance, and the variance that's being requested before you tonight is a front yard setback variance from 101.61 feet to 100 feet to allow an accessory structure to project beyond the established front building line of the primary structure for solar ground-mounted panels. Also, they did provide letters of support from their neighbors, and they also included a highlighted map of where those letters are from. This concludes my presentation, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for staff?
How did this get brought to your attention?
It was a complaint that went into our district commissioner's office.
It was a complaint that got in?
Yeah, it was a neighbor's complaint. They complained to our district commissioner. She then said, of course, contacted us, and as we reviewed the building permit, we realized that we had the oversight that it should have been routed to zoning.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
That was all.
If the applicant applied for X,
Right.
but installed Y,
He applied for X, and when X came in, X doesn't need to go to zoning. Got it. But then X changed to Y. Y has to go to zoning. So,
but that's an applicant's, so how is it an oversight on staff's part?
because we should recognize, oh, he's just changed his request from roof-mounted to ground-mounted. The ground-mounted now are considered to be a structure. Now, I do understand that with the building department, they're processing. As soon as an item comes in, there's hardly ever somebody changes something to that degree that would change the process of review. But something like this did change the process of review. And
So he notified the county of his change? Right.
yes,
Right, so
he
that's why he
resubmitted
said.
and said it was ground-mounted. We should have at that time said, oh, this is now a structure. We should now, it changes it, we should route it to zoning.
And it would have been posted, and the neighbors could have said something prior to construction, and
It wouldn't have been posted for something that receives a, what would have happened is that we would reject the permit, and they wouldn't have constructed the panels. But hence now they've constructed the panels, and for them to come in compliance with the code to move the panels, they state that it's financially not feasible, and they still would be visible to the neighbors. So us understanding that we are, we share the burden of this mistake, the variance process was our solution to this. So then it could be brought to the board under the public hearing process.
It's my understanding that the courts say, even though it was the government's error that allowed it to continue, that they
Yes.
consider it a problem to compound the error and continue. And they have forced shopping malls and other buildings to be torn down because of errors.
all
So-
apartment complexes have been torn down.
Right,
Absolutely.
so this really is not an issue of, yes, the county error caused it, however, we have to do something with it.
Does the county attorney's office have an opinion on this issue? Sorry to catch you flat-footed, I'm sorry, that's not fair, but do you all have an opinion on this process or where it stands?
Is the question being whether it was due to staff error or due to inaction by people who objected?
Or just whether you guys have generated an opinion just in general at all of this issue? Or
I do not believe that we have.
Okay. And as such, I won't ask tonight because that's not fair.
Okay.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir.
question for staff. So, understanding that you spoke with the applicant,
Let me clarify, because when staff met with the applicant, our county attorney was at the meeting, and he was part of the solution. So he is aware, county attorney's office is aware of this, and the solution was something that we all agreed upon in that meeting. And so,
until it became financially a burden.
By we being the applicant, not.
that they could use the variance process to address this.
Were the neighboring, any neighbors or any persons who might object to this part of that decision-making process?
No.
That's the hearing tonight.
So my question is this, reading the opposition, that we received in our packet, it seems that it's a visual, people across the lake seeing it. Part of the mitigation techniques that, again, was it discussed to be basically replacing, and not necessarily trees because it takes away from the fact that the ground-mounted solar panels, but some type of hedging, brush, landscape buffer that would basically separate the visual from across the properties, across the lake, to the ground-mounted signs. Was that ever discussed as an option?
I was not at that meeting, so I don't know if that was discussed or not. I can see some challenges in that, because with solar panels, you're supposed to have the sun hit them, and
Anything that hides it.
if you grow trees around it, that's going to defeat.
And that's why I refrain to use the word trees, but, I mean, you can build a viburnum, I'm not a landscape art, but a hedge that provides an opaque barrier that you can maintain the height, that would maintain the same height as I'm just asking if that was discussed. I'm not trying to find a solution.
Right, it was not, but that is something that the Board of Adjustment, as part of their decision, if that seems feasible, could have that as a condition, as part of the variance.
And the reason I bring that up is because, again, the opposition is, and from the picture, it looks like the shore is cleared along that area between where they're placed. If they could create a visual impairment, or, that would put a facade in front of it, that would block the view. Everybody's talking about they want to maintain the foliage and all that kind of stuff. It might satisfy that aspect of it, and I guess I was just asking if that was part of the conversation, so.
It wasn't at that.
And if it isn't, I'm going to make it part of the conversation this evening, so.
Fair point, fair point.
Okay. And I have solar panels, full solar on my house, and when we put them in, they were very adamant about even low trees in front of it are a problem, because in the winter, the sun's much lower. I don't know what you could put in front of it, that block them, that would still allow them to work, so they face due south.
Without knowing the height, the way I look at it is if the height is at or above the area where it would block it, it still may be able to maintain adequate sun versus relocation. So I'm not a landscape architect,
20
I'm not a
feet.
solar guy.
The height is 20 feet on the panels.
At the lowest or the highest point?
The mean height is 15, the roof slope is 7 feet to 20 feet. So it's pretty sizable structure, it's taller than my house, so.
Do we have any concerns with this construction violating arbor ordinance?
Correct, there were trees removed with this, and I would have to go back and see, typically in residential, that's not much as an issue as it would be for commercial. But Mary was actually at the meeting, so that was discussed.
Go ahead.
For the record, Mary Moskowitz, Planning and Development Service. This is a residential lot, so he could come and remove all the trees off of the existing lot. Lots less than 5 acres that are occupied do not require an arbor permit.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions for staff? Okay, is the applicant present? That's right here, I'm blind.
Hello.
Please state your name and address for the record.
Good evening. Josh Ginzel, representing Jack Ritter, 101 Caspian Cove.
Okay, what's your address, sir?
I'm 1571 Earhart Lane in Castleberry.
All right. What would you like to tell us, sir?
So we have multiple neighbors here who are supporting Mr. Gritter in the variance tonight. As discussed earlier, we have 9 signatures that we have collected. Mr. Gritter did going around for support. Should we have to move the solar panels in any way, it will not change the fact that the visual portion of it is still going to be along the lake. If we do have to go ahead and move this, if this variance is not approved, we will have to tear down 50-plus more feet of tree line along that shore.
Sir, while you're talking about it, let me ask you a question. If it was to be backed up, so it was within, didn't require a variance, and trees is it a possibility to plant trees in front of it that could screen it and still allow them to function?
So that's a great question. Part of the presentation that we put together does display that. And as Mr. Wright was speaking about, we do have a proposed viburnum hedge that will go in the front of it that will grow up to 10 feet. Of course, you know you can't buy viburnum at 10 feet, so it'll take a little bit of time to get there. But that hedge line that Mr. Gritter has gone ahead and proposed that will go up will block that the reflection that the complaint
But that's
came from.
10 feet, but the structure is 20 feet tall, so 10 feet of the structure would be above them after it grew.
It will be in the very front line. I could bring this up to show you.
Well, they can put it on the screen.
Okay, cool.
I'm just thinking about what the neighbors are going to say because they're complaining about being able to see it.
Sure.
And if you want, you can use this microphone here and speak if you want to.
So the proposed viburnum hedge, as you can see, I've illustrated here in blue. Of course, this is the location as it sits right now. This would be where we would move to, which would require us taking out southern live oaks, magnolias. These are all very mature trees. The ones that were taken down over here were smaller, but these are quite old. We can't put arms around some of them if we were to try. So the deforestation that you will wind up having to do in order to move these will be pretty significant, but it will not reduce the visual portion of it that neighbors see on the outside.
So if you move it, they can still see it.
They'll still see it. So whether we get the variance approved as is or we move it, it's still going to be there.
You just end up taking out more trees. Gotcha.
Yeah, the height is not 20 feet too, excuse me, the height is 9.
Okay, it's here, it's, mean height is 15 feet and roof slope is 7 to 20,
It's on the building permit.
before it was changed.
On the
probably.
building permit, we have the height and everything on the survey that's measured out on the array. Yeah, all the stamped plans have everything approved on that also, that have those measurements that came from the
I
survey
was
with Ireland.
just pulled it off our page of
Understood.
staff
Yes,
comments,
sir.
so that's
I get
where I
you.
was getting that from. So the height is 10? You
Yes.
said? So a 10-foot head would eventually grow over it.
It will, right, but we're going to place it far enough to the front so you will not affect the solar production, but you will put an obstruction in the front of it so anybody on this side of the lake will not see that for the most part.
Not a gardening expert, how long does it take viburnum to grow to 10 feet?
If you were to put in viburnum about as tall as I am, a couple of years. So it will take time, right?
Okay. I'm sorry to interrupt you, go ahead. What,
That was all I have for you tonight.
any questions for the applicant's representative?
Just to, Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir.
just to confirm, can you pull up the survey? There's 2 pages, I guess it's the first page. Sorry. That one right there, I don't know, can you zoom at all, or is it just static?
Maybe if I got out of presentation mode.
And honestly, what I'm looking at is those elevations at the corner of the solar panels on the right side. Looks like it says the grade is 43.9 and the top is 52.9. So is that the elevations that you're referring to, that ground in versus top of the structure?
Yes, sir. And that is 52.9.
So
53 top, 54, or excuse me, 45.
So basically, we're 2 feet above ground on the front and 9 feet above ground on the back,
Yes, you're,
if my math is right. Sorry. And it looks like 10 feet on the left side and 2 feet roughly on the lower left side.
no, where, I'm sorry.
I'm looking at the left side near the shed. It says 43.1 ground, 4505, was that 2 feet?
Right, so those are in inches. So you're 4 feet. give or
Inches?
take, From right here, is this what you're speaking of? I'm sorry, sir.
Yeah, I'm just looking at, it says 45.05 feet to the top, 43.1 to the bottom. Great.
Those should be, I think that's inches.
The survey you got says feet, so that's why I was just asking. I'm trying to do my own math, so. Basically, I'm just trying to confirm that we're not 20 feet tall.
No, we're not.
Thank you.
Yes, go ahead.
Question for staff. As the gentleman was sharing with us in the graphic where there's an orange box labeled proposed ground mount location should variance not be approved, does staff agree that that's an accurate statement?
Can you show me where they're,
It's the aerial photo that has an orange box on the right side labeled one or two back there.
that was in his presentation?
No, it's in our package.
It's in our packet.
Okay, I'm sorry.
It's on page 123.
But it's the same thing, that's the same
So you see
thing.
that top right bubble that says what it
Right.
says, does staff agree with that assertion?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Can I also add that among the signatures that we do have collected in the document of 9, that the gentleman who had, I think, originally put in the complaint about the glare coming from the solar panels, did sign this in approval after Mr. Gritter had gone around and talked about a proposed solution of the viburnum bush to reduce the reflection that's currently shining in on the rear of his home in the winter solstice as the sun is on a lower angle, so it's kind of reflecting back there. That will go ahead and eliminate his complaint that he has also for that wintertime glare.
What if it doesn't?
Excuse me?
What if it doesn't?
The viburnum?
Right. Let's say you plant it, time goes on, there's still a glare. What steps are, what would be your next step?
Based on the math that we've put in for the calculations and the irradiance of the panels with a 10-foot high viburnum shrub wall, if you will. I'm sorry, thank you.
I'm enough of a Florida boy to know that nothing we do with plants out there is guaranteed. So my question is remedies. I'm also enough of a litigator to know remedies. And so if you say, I promise you this will fix it, let's game plan it. Let's say it doesn't, for whatever reason. Despite your very best good faith efforts.
Yes, sir.
It doesn't. Is for that person who's affected, is the response, well, too bad we tried? Or what will that property owner be willing to do to say, okay, here's our plan B?
In what I know from Mr. Gritter, he'll do what's necessary in order to eliminate that glare that's coming from the solar panels.
Is Mr. Gritter here? Okay. I'm just wondering if we should maybe hear that from the applicant.
Sir, can you come forward for a moment? Good evening.
Mr. Britt, I'll just, so that I'm.
Hold on one second.
Sure.
Sir, state your name and address for record. please.
Certainly, Jack Gritter, 101 Caspian Cove, Sanford, Florida.
All right, go ahead, sir.
Mr. Gritter, you say you're going to do everything you can to minimize that glare, and I have no reason to not believe you. I mean, you say you would do it, but life's weird. And so just, we have you here before the record. What are your thoughts on that? Just, doggone it, despite your best efforts, there's still that glare.
I think I've come to know that it really wasn't glare that was the problem. It was more a case of seeing the panels. The gentleman I spoke with, in fact, he's here, Tommy, apparently expressed that he didn't like seeing the panels out of his backyard. And that we've got about 4 neighbors that come along that side of the lake opposing the panels. So I don't think glare is the actual issue, it's more of a site issue. But to answer your question, we're a small neighborhood. I've got representatives that have come in favor, that have lived there a long time. I've been there 25 years myself. We all get along, we all play nice. What's unique about the neighborhood is that my property could be considered rural if it weren't for the surrounding homes. I'm on 2.5 acres. I'm on a lake, I've got lake frontage in 2 sides of the property, one of which is kind of a finger lake that the solar panels front along. In terms of if it will still glare or what that would look like, just to clarify, it truly is a 9-foot height. The hypotenuse of the panels is 20 feet. It's 2 feet off the ground, 9 feet at the full height. And there's 18 feet from the front of the panels to where I could plant anything I want along that along the lakefront there. I actually own halfway into that lake, so we have abutting property lines. So it's pretty much available for me to plant, what I could do to make Tommy and the other neighbors happy. I'm not leaving the neighborhood, so being friendly is kind of who we are. So I'll do whatever it takes. And in fact, I'm the one that proposed making plantings or some sort of foliage. Tommy and his wife weren't thrilled at viburnum, although it would be a nice solid hedge. So I'm flexible. I'll plant pretty foliage, big leafy things. I don't really care. I did the math as well in terms of the winter solstice, which has the lowest elevation. And it's a 30-degree down slope, if you will, of the sun's rays at that point, which allows me at 18 feet from the front of the panels to go as high as 12 feet without inhibiting any of the sun's rays.
I appreciate what you're saying, sir, and I have respect for what you're saying, but going to my question, and the question was based on what your representative had shared with this board, and I think you might have said it towards the end of what you were saying, you will do what's necessary to make sure that glare is addressed.
Yeah. If glare's the issue, we'll take care of that. If the visual's the issue, we'll take care of that.
Gotcha. Thank you, sir.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything else?
Anything else for the applicant? All right, thank you, sir.
Thank you, appreciate your time.
Anything else?
May I just add one thing, just since I'm here?
Sure.
And I may be out of order, I apologize.
Oh, you're dying.
Okay, well, thank you. It was our intent fully to comply with everything that, the permit was issued under.
Sure.
And I appreciate your candor in the fact that the county missed that the application was for a ground mount, they produced a solar mount. So we all make mistakes. I don't have a problem with that. I think 2 things. One is the current location where the panels were placed under what they understood the permitting to be is really an area that's ideal for the panels, both in terms of capturing sun and in terms of not taking out some very pretty foliage that's at the point of where the finger of the lake meets the main lake. The neighbors, and I've got some folks here that will talk to that if you're interested, but just preserving the foliage, we've got a gorgeous point there. We're blessed to have a whole bunch of lake frontage on my lot. And we just don't really want to tear that down because it's not going to solve the fact that the folks across the lake can still see the panels. So even if we are in the revised permitted location meeting all the setbacks, it doesn't change the fact you can still see it. And it won't change the fact that I'm willing to still, play like a good neighbor and grow things up to stop it. But it really is going to destroy some pretty foliage and pretty tree growth on a real nice point to the lake. So thanks for that.
All right. Any other questions for the applicant's representative? Sir, is there anything else you would like to add to?
One last thing, please.
Yes.
And I appreciate y'all's time. I know we're running a little late. The one thing I'd like to add, yes, that with the application that was put in for the solar, listing it as rooftop was never put into the design as showing on the rooftop of the home itself. It's always been shown as a ground mount. I think on the next survey over, you will see that it's always been a ground mount. Was an error on our side, but that was reviewed 100% by Seminole County and stamped and approved. So that led us to go ahead and move forward with our decision to build at that point. And unfortunately, the individual who did make that mistake is no longer with our business. But we are set on making this project right 100% and do not intend on running into this issue again in the future.
Y'all made an error, the county made an error, things happen.
It happens. We won't see this happen again. Thank you all.
Any questions for the applicant's representative before he sits down? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone to speak in support of the request? Come on down.
Hi there.
Please state your name and address.
Alan Ambler, 211 South Crystal Drive. I'm right in front of Jack Ritter there. So just to lead with hedges, a couple of years ago, my front door is all glass. It really helps to bring a lot of light into it. About 4 or 5 years ago, my wife and I planted a podocarpus hedge out in front, and then now it's 10 feet tall after about 3 years. So if I could stand in my underwear in the front door, that's much safer now for all the neighbors in that neighborhood. So, sorry. Jack came and brought me this issue and started talking about his solar panels in complete earnest. Definitely apologetic through the process, even though in my consideration, none of the location happened to have been Jack's fault in that manner. But the second word out of his mouth was, hey, are you okay with it? Can I do something else? No, Jack, you're fine. I can't see anything back there from my house. I recommended the same podocarpus hedge that I had and talked about the success that I had for it to grow up in that manner. And he was very friendly about the whole thing. So I wholeheartedly support that. His characterization of our small community is also spot on. I would be able to do just about anything for him, as likewise he would do that same thing for me, and most of our neighbors are that way. So we are community. He's continuing to build community through this request for variance, and we really respectfully request your approval.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Is there anyone else to speak in support of the request? Is there anyone to speak in opposition to the request? Okay, do we have a motion?
Motion to approve, Mr. Chair.
We have a motion to approve. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second.
Excuse
Do we
me,
have
would
any
you like to
discussion?
include the hedge as part of your motion?
I thought it was because it was shown on the package, but
You have to make it part of the motion.
But as part of my motion, I would say, yes, I would like to make a motion to approve with the addition that the viburnum hedge be placed to provide some type of obstructive visual impairment to the existing structure.
And you okay with amending the motion? You're the second.
Yeah, I thought it was part of it as well,
Okay.
so, yeah, that's
Okay.
fine.
My bad, sorry.
Discussion. All right. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. It's approved with the condition that you plant the hedge that you promised, and we'll take you at your word. If that doesn't work, you will seek other solutions to make your neighbors happy. Have a good night.
Is that supposed to be part of my motion too? Second part?
No, that's just...
What, that Kathy's right? That's what she said.
So we can close out this
Hold on
part
one
of
sec.
this meeting with the minutes.
That says... So, minutes, any changes, additions, deletions?
Move to approve.
Motion to approve, we have a second?
I wasn't here.
Any discussion? All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, motion carries or approved. All right.
We put statements from you in the record.
So is the next item going to be the training, or
I just move over the seat.
which way would you like to?
Would the board like to take like a 5-minute break before we go to our second agenda for this evening? Or would
Anybody
you guys
need a
like to
break?
just go ahead and get
Get
into
a sip of
it?
water?
Power through.
Are we staying up here, or are we coming down,
Oh,
or?
you're staying up there.
Is the next
You guys
item?
want to
gonna
power
be-
through?
The next is going to be the presentation from the county
The
attorney?
next is going to be county attorney's ethics.
I'll tell you what we'll do.
training.
We'll do that, then we'll take a short break.
Okay, let's do that. And I just wanted to open up is that,
Suddenly, nobody cares enough to show up and actually say something in public. It's like, all right, you don't care that much about it.
Okay, fellas. Go ahead, Kathy.
Okay, let's see, let's make sure I can work this properly. All right. First of all, good evening to members of the Board of Adjustments. As you all may recall, my name is Desmond Morrell. Once upon a time served as your counsel here, but was replaced by the wonderful Desiree.
It's much better.
Yeah, it looks like you guys have been working her a little bit, so happy to have a little reprieve, but I'm happy to be back to provide you all with a basic rundown. We usually do this annually for all of our boards and committees within the county. I will go pretty quickly. I know we had a pretty lengthy agenda previously. So, big snapshot of what we'll be covering today. Comprehensive overview of Seminole County's BOA, Florida's government in the sunshine, and public records laws, as well as ethics, laws, and requirements for board members and other officers within the state of Florida. So generally, what is the purpose of BOA? BOA is comprised of commissioner-appointed volunteers tasked with hearing and deciding variances, and those individuals are you all. So what exactly is a variance? A variance is a deviation from the set of rules that a county applies to land use and land development. The powers of the Board of Adjustment are codified in Section 30.43 of the Seminole County Code. I believe you all received a copy of those when you first joined this board, but you can always access them via our website or on Municode. So generally speaking about variances, now I sat in the back, I watched as you all applied these 7 factors that you consider when determining when to grant a variance and when to deny. So I'll go through those seven factors pretty quickly. Number 1, the special conditions and circumstances exist which are unique to that parcel of land, structure, or building, and which are not applicable to other lands, structures, or buildings in the same zoning classification. So something unique about that particular parcel of land that requires, in the applicant's view, a variance. Number 2, the special conditions and circumstances do not result from the actions of the applicant, meaning the applicant didn't go and create this hardship himself or herself. It's just the nature of that particular parcel. Oftentimes we see corner lots or other unique lots that have extenuating circumstances. Number 3, that granting the variance requested will not confer on the applicant any special privilege that is denied by Chapter 30 to other lands, buildings, or structures in the same zoning classification. So generally, we want to adhere to the zoning requirements of that area. We try to make it conform as best we can. However, we know there are circumstances where they can't, and that's why they're here, to see whether or not a variance is necessary. Number 4, that literal interpretation of the provisions of Chapter 30 would deprive the applicant, let's see how well my glasses are working, would deprive the applicant of rights commonly enjoyed by other properties in the same zoning classification and would work unnecessarily and undue hardship on the application. So in other words, it's not causing some sort of undue hardship to the others. Or by the literal interpretation of the code, it would preclude that individual from enjoying their home or having the general enjoyment that the neighbors or other individuals within that area would be able to enjoy. 6, that the variance granted is the minimum variance that will make possible the reasonable use of the land, building, or structure. You all do a great job of that. I know oftentimes folks come in asking for a 15-foot or 10-foot, and you all try to find that perfect happy medium where you can make everybody kind of happy, but something that's going to be the minimal variance. Because again, we're not looking to deviate from our zoning and our codes very much. Trying to do the least intrusive changes that we can, and least intrusive variances. And number 7, that the grant of the variance will be in harmony with the general intent and purpose of Chapter 30. So again, we're not looking to, make large variances. We want to generally have some sort of continuity here, but again, understanding certain parcels, certain structures have unique features that will oftentimes require these variances. So, in deciding when to, or in determining when it's appropriate to grant a variance or not, we have what is considered a quasi-judicial hearing, and that's what you all are, or particularly the chair, is in charge of presiding over. So, what is a quasi-judicial hearing? It's generally a hearing in which there's a finder of fact or a body that weighs the veracity and the legitimacy of the evidence that is being presented. Now, quasi-judicial, you see that first, and geez, language arts, English, quasi, that means somewhat judicial, kind of judicial, but we don't follow the exact rules of evidence. I know Mr. Hadaway is probably familiar with those rules. It's not the most exciting set of rules, but thankfully for all of you all, we're not adhering to them very strictly. So we try to have some sort of some guidelines, some guidance, but we're not really nitpicky as far as, objections and all this for various evidentiary procedures. And number 2, we must adhere to certain standards of the basic fairness to afford due process. So we do not strictly follow the rules of evidence, however, we still look to promote fair and due process, and in order to do that, we ensure that each side, both the opponents or those requesting variances, give them the opportunity to be heard. We want to ensure that members of the public have an opportunity to be heard. You guys seem to know this really well. You all go through this procedure very well. Give the credit to the chair, but I know it's a group effort, so give yourselves a pat on the back for always staying on task and procedurally staying on point. So, the minimum due process requirements for quasi-judicial hearings. So what do we have to have at the very least to ensure that there's some sort of due process and that we're doing things as they should? Number 1, we need to provide a notice of hearing. Our clerk and our staff team does an excellent job of making sure that those notices get out. We must provide an opportunity for the public to be heard, or particularly applicants to be heard. You all do a great job of that. It's never really an issue. And lastly, parties must be able to, 1, present evidence, 2, cross-examine witnesses, or 3, be informed of all facts upon which the commission acts. So if you all are basing your decisions on some sort of information or some ex parte communication that you may have received, it's oftentimes, it's necessary for you to share that information with our clerk just so we have that in the record. So if you received an email, I think Hillary sent one out earlier. Again, we want to make sure that every piece of evidence that you all are relying on in making your decisions, that our clerk has it so that it's in the record. So if anybody picks this up years from now, they can see that competent and substantial evidence that you all placed your faith behind and what dictated your decision. Providing an opportunity to be heard. So what does this mean? It means that the public may address the commission. So we see this time and time again. It's not just the applicant. You all oftentimes open up the floor so that members of the public, neighbors, anybody who has an interest in a particular variance does have an opportunity to speak. So the party is entitled to participate in the proceeding. However, communication outside of the presence of the other party is considered ex parte communication and must be submitted to the clerk. I got a little ahead of myself there. And the determination of a party. So who exactly is a party for these variances? An applicant or a property owner of the land at issue is typically deemed a party. So I see that you all oftentimes kind of figure out, sometimes there will be a contractor or someone who gets up and speaks on behalf of something, and you always ask, is the homeowner or the applicant present? And y'all do a great job of that because, again, they have the absolute right to speak as well. They're ultimately the individuals who are making this application for the variance. It's just oftentimes there's a hired gun like an attorney or a contractor or someone who's a little more familiar and gets up and speaks. But it's always important to give that actual homeowner the opportunity. So thank you all for doing that. And the general standard for deciding when somebody does have standing to bring a variance or challenge something, and the determination is going to be whether there's an adverse impact. So for me, if I'm applying for a variance, I need to be the person who's affected. If I'm, Joe Schmo who lives a few blocks down, simply very involved in his local politics, doesn't have much skin in the game, but simply knew the hearing was going to take place and wants to come up and chat and give his peace of mind, he may be able to do that via public comment. However, he does not have the standing where he is absolutely necessary to the hearing, where he does have that explicit and absolute right to get up there and speak. So please keep that in mind, especially when we're weighing out the veracity of that evidence. All right, so why is it important to determine whether somebody is a party or just a member of the public? Well, a party under due process must be able to do the following, and I already went through these. But again, generally, the actual party to a variance is going to have a few more rights than a member of the public. So for a member of the public or general participants, the Florida law does not require all participants have a right to cross-examine folks. So again, if I'm Joe Blow from 3 blocks down, I can't get up and start cross-examining our expert witness to figure out, well, how well does this individual really know this information? How much truth or how much weight should we give to their presentation? That's not up to that individual. However, the individual with standing can in fact do that because he or she may have that adverse impact based on the testimony. Haven't had this problem here, but it is important to know, especially Chair, it's important to note that you can limit the amount of time that individuals have for public comment. Our Board of County Commissioners generally limits it to 3 minutes per member of the public, or if you're representing an HOA or a big group, you have up to 6 minutes. I'm not sure if you all have adopted that policy or if you abide by it, but you have the right to. I see a nod, which means that's a yes. Good. All right, so in making a decision, as I said before, you all are the triers of fact. So you all weigh out the veracity of the evidence. You all determine how much weight to give to a particular witness or a particular applicant. You all weigh out those 7 factors that I mentioned before and ultimately provide a ruling one way or the other. You approve or deny, or in some circumstances, you'll continue it. It's important to know if somebody wants to challenge some of this, I think the first step for challenging a BOA appeal is for it to go to the Board of County Commissioners. Is that right, Mary?
Yes.
Yes. And so after the Board of County Commissioners, the board makes their decision, and then that can still get appealed, and at that point it goes to the circuit court. When that circuit court is looking to determine whether or not they should grant the appeal or not, all they are looking to is the record to determine whether or not you all base your decision on competent and sufficient evidence. And so again, so long as your decision isn't arbitrary and capricious, meaning you didn't just get up and make a call on the whim, that you actually cited to some evidence or weighed things out, that's all the circuit court is looking to do. They're not looking to say whether you made the best decision, but again, was it rooted in some sort of evidence, competent, substantial evidence. Yep, and again, from the case in Miami-Dade, you see again, that's the case where they do emphasize that the appeals court only looks at the record. It's not a new hearing. They based it on the transcript. They look for that competent, substantial evidence to see whether you all made your determination based on that. And what is competent, substantial evidence? So this question actually comes up pretty often. So I'll just go through it pretty quickly. A professional staff report. Professional staff report is usually rooted in, some sort of legal analysis or some sort of expert-based analysis, at which point they devise some sort of report for you all to rely on in your decision-making. Testimony by a county planning or zoning official, and the idea here is, again, this is that individual's profession. They're probably more so experts in this field than a lay person off of the street. Should probably give them a little bit more deference as far as what it is that they're saying about that particular request or that particular hearing. An expert witness. So may have seen this in the past, but there are folks who spend their careers or moonlight as experts. But in order to become or to hold yourself out as an expert, you have to establish that. Oftentimes that's established based on the education, based on training, based on specific background. If we don't elicit that sort of testimony while they're up here, then we can't give them the full deference of being an expert. I could be an expert in something, but how would you all ever know that unless that information didn't come up, unless that background wasn't there for the record. I mean, I need to establish the schooling, the type of education, the years, the hours spent. That's the sort of thing that'll really give some oomph to what it is that I'm saying as an expert witness. Citizen testimony. Fact-based testimony is perfectly permissible and constitutes substantial and competent evidence. However, mere generalized statements of opposition are to be discarded. So oftentimes you'll see individuals who can come up and cite to specific instances or issues with the property or with the request for a variance, and then sometimes you might just see people come up and say, I don't like it, I don't want it here. And, you know, for all we know, that could be a personal dispute between neighbors. It could be something that has nothing to do with the merits of of granting that actual variance. So it's important to kind of try to peel the layers back and figure out how much this person is really able to contribute to the particular discussion. All right, so we've gone through all of this variance stuff. You guys are pretty familiar with this, but how do we know whether or not what you all are doing up on this dais is actually legal? How do we know that the decisions that you make are binding, that they're going to hold some sort of precedent moving forward? Well, in order to do that, we ensure that we do this proceeding in a legal fashion. And for you all, as a board in the state of Florida, you all have to abide by the tenets of the Government in the Sunshine Law. And that law basically requires 4 major tenets. Number 1, all meetings must be open to the public. And number 2, reasonable notice of the meetings must be given. Number 3, minutes of the meetings must be taken and promptly recorded. And number 4, the public has a right to speak on all matters except ministerial and emergency matters. Ministerial and emergency matters, emergency kind of speaks for itself. We're not going to get up here and discuss the blueprints of our building or some of our emergency scenarios and what we do if there's, I don't know, an active shooter drill or something of that nature, balancing safety versus, you know, public transparency. Ministerial duties are simply administrative stuff. We're not going to spend 20 minutes deciding why we staple on the left side of the paper versus the right side of the paper. Government in the Sunshine Law. So when is this triggered? Government in the Sunshine Law applies to a gathering of 2 or more members of the same board. So if I see, you know, Jim and Larry getting together for lunch, might not think much of it, but in the back of my mind, I'm like, please don't start discussing variances. Please don't discuss something that could foreseeably come before this board. Anything that you're going to discuss that has to do with the business of this board, we want it to be done in the open, in the sunshine, something that's recorded, so that any individual who wants to pick up the minutes or figure out why you decided one way or another on the variance, they can get a copy of those minutes, or they can attend physically. And so Government in the Sunshine Law applies to meetings and discussions conducted via telephone and computers as well. So oftentimes we see this with our physical meetings. But if for some reason we have to hold this via telephone conference or a Zoom, we want to make sure that we're also abiding by those 4 tenets. Now, I will say this is very rare that it happens, because in order for us to have some sort of Zoom meeting, we need a local state of emergency, and we need to ensure that our governor has allowed us to use some sort of communicative media technology, Zoom, conference, some other media. All right. Government in the Sunshine. So the use of non-members such as the county staff and commissioners' aides as liaisons to circulate information and thoughts of individual board members is prohibited. So if Austin is sharing some information with Hillary in hopes that it gets back to Jim before the meeting, of course that's prohibited. All Austin is doing is simply giving that message to Jim, but sending it through Hillary. So it's the same exact thing. So if any staff or any of us feel like we're kind of being used as a conduit to share a message or pass information about items that should be discussed on the dais, we're just going to kind of do one of these things and make sure that we're not relaying that message. We encourage you all have those discussions up on the board in the sunshine. In addition, staff and other non-members should refrain from asking board members in order to provide the information to the other board members to state his or her position on a specific matter. So prior to the meeting, if Austin is emailing Jim or Larry is emailing the chair about certain items, we want to refrain from doing that. We want to make sure that Austin's not polling to kind of see, all right, how many approvals are we going to do today? Over or under 4 or 5? We don't want to do anything like that. However, if Austin decides to circulate a report simply to get ahead of this, I think Hillary did this earlier today, she sent out an email so that all of you all were aware of a particular opposition to an item. It's not looking to engage in any discussions, not looking for, Austin and Jim to have their side conversation or anything. It's just so that we'll run the meeting more efficiently. We don't have to spend the first 20 minutes catching up on reports. You're more than welcome to circulate reports for the simple reason of informing your board members of an item that's going to be discussed later on. Board members may not engage in an exchange or discussion of matters on Facebook or other social media that may foreseeably come before the board for action. Same concepts. I would just hate to go on the Seminole County's Facebook page and see, on one of the threads that, our chair is going back and forth with Larry as to why Larry shouldn't have been the, third approval vote on some variance. We don't want to see that on a Facebook page. We don't want to see that on Instagram or any social media. So use those the same way you would operate here. We don't want to use that as an alternate forum for you all to exchange dialogue or something that needs to take place, again, out in the open and the sunshine. Public access to meetings is one of the key elements of the Sunshine Law, and board members are advised to avoid holding meetings in places not easily accessible to the public. So again, think of a facility like this. It's clearly at the county services building. We have massive double doors. Anybody can come in and participate, ample seating, as opposed to if you all were to have your meeting at, I often use the example of Ruth Chris Steakhouse. Folks will come in thinking, well, I got to order this $70 T-bone. I got to dress up nice and spiffy. No, we want to make sure people can come as they are, feel comfortable. This is a government entity. We want to ensure that our residents have the ability to show up, they know what it is that you do, and then we're not making these backdoor deals in some dimly lit steakhouse where individuals are not aware of it. We conduct our business in the open, in the sunshine, for everybody to see and hear. And so what do we mean by the term open to the public? Open to the public simply means that that if a member chooses to attend, that they can. So if members wanted to come to this meeting, there's plenty of seats for them to sit in. The doors are wide open. There's parking. There's perfect facilities. There's no admission fee, anything like that. So just keep that in mind. I know it's ultimately not up to you all, but kind of got to know this. So. A couple of frequently asked questions. So do we need to have written minutes? Yes, at some point, even if we record our minutes via video or via audio, we need our clerk at some point to make sure that she captures these and reduces them to writing or text. Are board members authorized to abstain from voting? The short answer is no. You all have been appointed to serve in this role. Different commissioners have evaluated, I'm sure, a number of potential appointees, but they chose you all. So unless there's a specific conflict or some reason that you cannot vote, your role is to make those tough decisions. That's what you've been appointed to this board to do. And unless there's a conflict, I would encourage you to make sure you are voting on all of these. Does the Sunshine Law restrict the board from taking action on matters not on the agenda? No. If the chairman wants to bring new business to the board, he has the absolute right to do so. May a member of the public tape record a board meeting? Yes. Sometimes in more controversial items, you may even see members of the media present. They're more than welcome to set up their cameras and record you all. So please be mindful of that. You never know who's going to be here on which day, so make sure you've got a nice smile on your face. And then lastly, does the Sunshine Law apply to one board member meeting with one member of a different board? No. And why? Because what could they really exchange? I mean, there's no discussion there, or excuse me, it's not being triggered because there's not more than one member of this board meeting. So if Jim wants to meet with a member of our planning and zoning board, completely fine. I mean, that's okay. They don't have any particular business together. So penalties. So what happens if we violate some of this? Well, there are civil and criminal penalties that are possible. Civil penalties up to $500 against each participating member, and that's for each offense. So that can grow pretty quickly. But then there's also the possibility of criminal penalties, which include incarceration, fines, probation, and of course there's the removal of office. So we haven't had that issue here. I think it's because the attorneys do such a good job of educating you all. But no, you guys do an excellent job in your roles, and you know know how to kind of stay in the lanes and kind of stay in bounds. So I applaud you all for that. But if there's ever a question as to, hey, Desmond, I'm not too sure about, this portion of the Sunshine Law or whether we're comporting ourselves the way we need to, I'm happy to discuss anything with you all. So feel free to email or give me a call and we can chat through any of those ethics-related issues. So what happens if, you get through a meeting and it wasn't properly held under the Sunshine Law? Basically voids any actions that have taken place. So if we had this whole meeting and we didn't properly notice it, or we had it all in Ruth's Chris Steakhouse, everything we've done at that point would be void. So we don't want to waste anybody's time, so we want to make sure we do things right the first time. All right, so moving along into public records. So as board members, you all are subjected to Chapter 119's public records laws, but that is specifically to your work here with the county. So Florida's public records laws provide for citizens to have virtually unlimited access to the records of government. And I can tell you, because I've been drowning in public records requests for like the last 2 weeks, that it really does look like this. So we're hoping that we don't have to deal with too many coming out of this board. But when it does, we want to make sure that we know how to do this. So what exactly is a public record? Public record is all books, papers, letters, maps, books, tapes, photographs, films, sound recordings, data processing software, or other material regardless of physical form, characteristic, or means of transmission, made or received pursuant to the law or ordinance or in connection with the transaction of official business by any agency. So that's a mouthful. For me, I usually remember it thinking, if it perpetuates, communicates, or formalizes county business, it's a public record. And it's a public record regardless of the medium that it goes out. If it goes out from your private cell phone, or if it goes out from your handwritten notes, those can all be deemed public records. Okay, and so these are just some quick examples of public records that we commonly come across. And I want to emphasize a couple of these on here. Emails and text messages. So oftentimes people think just because I use my private email address that it's not a public record. Well, if it still communicates, formalizes, or perpetuates county business, it is a public record. You are still using some sort of medium to create a record that has to do with county business. So by definition, it essentially is a public record. Same thing goes for text messages. I encourage everybody, if you all are speaking to staff or to each other about county business, pick up the phone and call them. There's no record of that. And, it's not to say that you're looking to hide something, but it's a lot easier when I have to go back and compile the records and dig through them and figure out, well, why did Jim send this in an email? And why did the chair make this snarky response? I don't want to deal with that. So you all chat amongst yourselves. If that comes, of course, not about business foreseeable before the board, but, if somebody's going to be absent, hey, Jim is calling, our chair and saying, hey, I got the flu, I'm not going to make it. So that's perfectly fine. Again, if there is a written record of it, it's a public record. If you pick up the phone and call, it's, all we know is that a phone call took place.
Question.
Yes, sir.
Just real quick, sorry to interrupt.
No problem.
I didn't know if we could, a question and answer during or...
Yeah, no, please, by all means. If you all have questions, raise your hand, make it as conversational as possible.
You bring up a point, so, for instance, Hillary sent out email today to us. Mm-hmm. If somebody was egregious or whatever, just didn't, can they request every one of my personal emails because I use my personal email as...
No, not necessarily, because again, your entire personal email box, I would imagine, is personal emails. Yeah. So I'm looking for the items that are county business related.
How would you know that, or the other person know that without requesting all of them to go sort through them?
Sure, so that's where it
And the
gets...
reason I ask that is because in the former life, the municipality gave us our own email addresses so that it eliminated that issue. And obviously, we don't do that here, so I'm just asking if...
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So personally, I would encourage, it's not really up to me, it's above my pay grade. But yeah, all of you all would have a Seminole County email address. Since we don't do that, I would encourage you all to create your own email address. Create a Gmail, Yahoo, whatever it may be, just for the purposes of this board. That way, we don't have to sift through, family pictures along with, variance requests or agendas or minutes. We know that this email address is just for the county business. So if any challenges or requests come up, we only have access to that. Now, I know that that's not always the case. So the first thing I do is to ask if we received a request like that, hey, scrub through your emails, identify all the items that have to do with county business, identify all the items that are then responsive to this particular request. I'll give you the opportunity to review them, and then I'll say, turn them over to me, at which time I'll review and take a look. But you raise a very good point, Larry, because say these were on your cell phone and these were text messages. There's really no other way to do that. I'd have to, at some point, scroll through that phone and see what's what, and I don't want to look through your phone, Larry. I'm sure it's...
Yeah, I don't want you looking at my browser
I'm sure
history
it's
either.
perfectly clean, but, I have no business there. So as often as we can, we like to separate, whether that's its own email address, its own cell phone or something. But again, to get around all of that, the phone, there's no record of stuff, if you're just calling, Okay. Does that answer your question?
It did. I know in the past, that's how we got past that, so.
Yeah, if we could, I would say email addresses. If not, make your own. I think that'll just make everybody's life a little easier. So if we receive a request, we must respond to that request in a reasonable amount of time. Now, a reasonable amount of time has not necessarily been defined. We kind of, via case law and some other examples, we kind of define that as 10 days to 14 days, so about 2 weeks. But again, these is one of those things where time is of the essence. So if I can turn around a public records request, try to do that immediately. Again, I don't want that sitting on my desk. I don't want it to fall through the cracks, because if I fail to respond to that, then I'm in hot water. So I try to get those off my desk as quickly as possible. Here we are. So penalties. What happens if we fail to provide those public records? And individual violations can be prosecuted criminally, or we can take a civil avenue, at which point we can fine and take some other avenues, such as removal from office, injunctions, et cetera, et cetera. The county can be assessed attorney's fees for failing to comply, and of course a board member can be removed from office for failure to comply. All right, and so this is the last section. This is Chapter 112, which kind of provides our ethical guidelines for all public officers within the state, and whether you all knew it or not, but you all qualify as public officers because you all are appointed board members. So generally, Chapter 112 covers the solicitation and acceptance of gifts, doing business with one's own agency, unauthorized compensation, the misuse of one's position, conflicting employment, the disclosure of certain information. So quickly, we alluded to this earlier, but voting conflicts. So, generally, you shall not vote on a matter that would inure to your private gain or loss, or to that of a principal, business associate, a parent organization or subsidiary thereof, or of a relative. So, and I've seen this happen here before, but it has never been with a relative or anybody that close. It's usually been with a neighbor. Oh, I ride my bike by this person's house, or oh, that person lives at the front of my neighborhood. But that doesn't necessarily qualify or rise to the level of a conflict. So unless there's a special gain to your relative, to your business associate, or to you, or a loss to them directly, there is no conflict, which means you all have to hear that case out and you have to vote one way or the other. If there is a voting conflict, we encourage you to file what is called a Form 8B, and essentially you just write down what the item was, why you're abstaining, what the conflict is, and then we give that to the clerk, and she just keeps that with the minutes of everything else. Doesn't happen too often. We see it more so with the Board of County Commissioners. So just kind of an FYI, if that voting conflict does arise, make sure you announce the conflict. You can say on record what it is, and then you can get with either me or Desiree, and we'll get you Form 8B to fill out. Really simple, it's one pager. Gone over this. All right, again, weighing out voting conflicts. These are just some factors to consider to see how much of a gain or a loss is it. Is this really a gain or a loss, or is this just something that I'm kind of uncomfortable with? And again, these are the factors: the size of the class affected, the nature of the interest, the degree to which the interests of the member are affected, and the degree to which the officer or his or her relative or principal has a greater benefit or harm when compared to the other members of that class. So what does it mean to participate? Participate means the discussion and the voting. So any influence that you have on a particular vote that could, result in the conflict. So when you know that there's a conflict, I say refrain from the discussion and refrain from the vote. And just like that, we're done. So, I know that was kind of quick, but generally we went over sunshine law, public records, and 112 ethics. If you have questions about any of those, you're more than welcome to reach out to me directly. You guys have been on this board for a little while, and you probably get this annually, so I know a lot of you kind of have this ingrained in the back of your head. But I personally want to thank you all for what it is that you do. You make it a little easier on us as the attorneys sometimes, and even when you catch us flat-footed, you give us the grace that we need to at least do some research, so I appreciate that. But we're here to assist you all. Staff does great, but don't forget, if you need legal advice or questions about anything, we're here to serve you all as the board. So please keep that in mind. Any other questions? Yes, sir, Mr. Hadaway?
Are appeals, excuse me, allergies and asthma, are appeals from our board to the county commission anything other, is the standard of review from us to the Board of County Commission anything other than de novo?
It's de novo.
Okay.
So they have the opportunity to weigh this out, fresh slate.
No difference.
There you go. So de novo essentially means from scratch. It's not like where you relying on this record. They hear everything as if it didn't happen. So, yes. But the circuit court is different. Circuit court only bases it on that the transcript. Yes, sir.
A couple things, just real quick. Is it necessary when we vote to make a motion to deny, necessary to say why? And I go back to the, again, from a defensible position, if I just don't like the way it is because I personally don't like it and I vote to deny it without giving any basis based on the foundation of the code, is that a reasonable challenge?
So I'll put it this way, and it seems like you're just trying to get ahead of any issues, and I can appreciate that. So essentially, when reviewing the record, the courts are going to look to what kind of evidence was offered up, and then they're going to see what the conclusion was. If the ultimate vote was a no, they're going to look to see, well, was there anything in the record that could have possibly supported that no? And if there's just nothing there, then it's going to be really hard to defend that. So in order to overcome that obstacle, it's always good if you could give your little, I don't want to say this in a derogatory means or anything, but it's always good to give, your take on why you're making the motion. And oftentimes, our commissioners are pretty astute at this. I mean, they're professional politicians, but they'll get in their phrases as to why, and then they'll make their motion. And I think that's pretty creative because what they're doing is they're getting certain things on record. So I think that's a great idea if you want to kind of get your point across or itemize some facts that you're basing your decision on. I think that doesn't hurt at all.
It's not just denials, even supporting a motion. Discussion's a good place for that.
Bingo.
Throw it out in discussion to get it on the record.
Yep.
Yeah, I've always tried, and the habit was
I mean, were you saying yes?
denials were always the ones that usually got challenged, acceptance not necessarily, but you make a valid point, so.
Yeah, great question.
The other, and I apologize, there was another one. It goes back to, the evidentiary part. Tonight is a perfect example. People were impacted because their views of something that isn't on their property was impacted.
Mm-hmm.
We see this a lot. I mean, is that a true testament to, what rights does someone have to a view? For instance, and the example I give is one of the lots that we looked at tonight. I don't know what the size was, but one of the, staff brought up is that, we asked about trees. Well, on a certain parcel, they can clear all the trees without an arbor permit. If that person wanted to clear the entire lakefront to make a beach, the people were pissed because they lost the views of the trees. Is that
So we have
how do we balance that?
We have those 7 factors that we look to. And so I think one of those factors was the ability to enjoy your property, the ability to utilize it as you saw fit. Now, going to be hard pressed to argue that if my neighbor cuts down his trees and I lose the view of some pretty trees or something, that's a tough argument to make. They were never my trees to begin with. Now, if they were to put something that could, say, obstruct my lakefront view, that's a bit different. I bought the home with the intention of having this view. All of this is technically my property. However, I don't know, the angle of the fence or something may kind of challenge my ability to enjoy the lake or see and get all that good stuff. Something to consider. It's
well,
tough.
that's a valid one because, I mean, again, if I have a property that's on a lake, I have the right to look at the property from my.
No,
No, you don't.
No.
But I don't have the right to look at
It's not
somebody
the-
else's property across.
It's not the right to look, and I think that's what Jim and
No right to
Chair are
use
saying.
or
It's not particularly the right, but it's the enjoyment of that property. And there's an argument to be made. There's not a specific right to say, hey, got to be able to see that lake.
No,
because
and I understand. What I'm saying is that if someone in my property puts up something that obstructs my view on my property, I have that right. But I don't have the right to look across my neighbor's property and say, that's my view because you're obstructing it now.
Right, we've had an opinion in the past on some lakefront issues where we asked the attorney's office, and they said they do not have a right to a view caused by a fence or lack thereof and trees, or they're, the neighbor, if they're, as long as what they're doing is lawful, they can do it.
I think it was
as
in
long as-
Sand Lake last year, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Any additional questions?
I promise you, sir, that if I go to prison, it won't be because I texted about a hedge by a swimming pool.
I'm
going for something
sure.
good.
Please make it worth much more than a text message.
I promise.
All right, thank you all. It's always good seeing you.
Well done, thank you.
All right. Let's take a 5-minute break, bathroom break, and then we'll finish this up. At least I will. I'm getting old.
It was in First Street property lines, there was this case.
Hey, Bernard, how much longer do you think it
Back
is?
when they were building this Miami Beach. Or one was.
All right,
Ready?
we're ready.
Well, good evening. Again, for the record, Mary Moskowitz, I'm the Planning and Development Manager. And I'm going to just give you a little brief update on some of the updates that we're doing to our land development code, specifically to the fence regulations. I believe you guys received a copy of these recently. Just a little bit of background. We are in the process of updating our entire land development code, specifically Chapter 30, which deals with zoning. It hasn't been updated in, I want to say, about 40 years. And so there's just some antiquated language, some formatting things. So anytime you think you're going to have a really quick process and it's only, real 6 months, we're just going to clean things up. 3 years later, I'm standing here today to talk to you about that process. But we did want to update some of our sections, and one of them is specifically related to the fencing. So what we've done right now, fencing is in Part 70, which is the supplemental regulation. So it's kind of thrown out there with it's in between non-conforming uses and truck parking. So, it makes a lot of sense being out there. So one of the first things we're doing is we're consolidating a lot of those sections, and now fencing will be under the landscaping, screening, buffering, and open space section. So this is just a chart kind of comparing what our existing code says and what the new proposed language is. So this will be Part 1420 in the new code. Right now, in Section A of the proposed code, we specifically are addressing repairs. We're currently silent on that section. So a lot of times somebody will come in and they'll say, well, do I need a building permit for this? And so we want it to be very explicit and say, what did you, if you just need to come in and replace, a board, you don't need a building permit for it. But we wanted to say 10% of the total linear foot or more than 2 panels, you're going to have to come in and get a building permit to make that. That's beyond just a kind of, tidying up. That's a major repair to your fence. The other thing that we had a lot of problems with is the surveys. We don't have any requirements for surveys, and so people could just literally give us a sketch on the back of a napkin and say, here's where my fence is going to go. And so we really had no way of saying, this is what you need to provide us. So we're explicitly requiring a certified survey, no more than 5 years old, but we are giving people that out because, I know it can be kind of expensive to go out and get a survey. So if the building inspector can find those corner markers, then we can waive that requirement for a survey. But we really need to make sure that these fences are going where they say they're going to be going and meeting our code. An interesting fact about our code is the applicability. So right now, the fencing ordinance really only applies to residential, and I say residential, that's zoned residential. So we have a lot of properties that have an A1, an agricultural zoning on them, but are essentially a single-family home. And currently, the fencing regulations do not apply to those zoning districts. And actually, we don't even have regulations in our commercial and industrial zoning districts. So some guy wants to come in and just, put up a fence in his industrial park. Right now, he has to come in and get a small site plan to do that. We don't have an implicit way for somebody to get a fence. This is the big difference here. We've got our setback regulations. So right now, we were saying anything under 3 feet could go in the front yard. If you look at modern fences now, most of those picket fences that you've seen in the front yard, they're actually 4 feet high. So now we're allowing people to actually be able to get a picket fence in their front yard. And then we say, and this is where we get kind of into the corner lot situation, but currently now all fences have to meet the setbacks of the zoning district. So that's where you see those side yard setbacks. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later in the presentation. And then, of course, adding the commercial fences. We are allowing the taller fences on our commercial and industrial properties. And then in the ag property, we do allow for that 5-foot fence because a lot of times those are more of those estate properties, and so they may have more of a gated entry type feature. So it bumps that up. You can put those 5-foot fences in your front yard on those larger properties. But I want to emphasize, fences for ag exempt properties, still, you don't need to get a permit for that. If you're fencing in your cows, don't come to us to get a permit. Okay, so this is probably the big one, the corner lots. And so what we are now saying is on that secondary street or your side yard setback, that you can go to a 5-foot setback for, on that side yard. So that's probably where we see a lot of those variances and the most variances that we see. We did a lot of research on this, and this is consistent with a lot of other jurisdictions, so that it allows you to put that fence a little bit further out. Now, this is subject to approval from the county engineering staff, the traffic engineering staff, and you do have to preserve the site triangles. So we want to make sure that as vehicles are coming in, they can still see around the corner. So for example, today you guys did a variance for a side street, and you reduced that down to 10 feet. They would not have needed to come into a variance had the new code been in effect at the time. This is something, and I think you guys may have talked about this a little bit. We have a lot of creative ways people protect their property, and one of them is using vegetation. This is particularly true on our water bodies, and so we have made it more clear what the height of those fences are adjacent to the water bodies. So you have to be no taller than 4 feet, 30 feet from that mean high water line or normal high water line, and that includes things like hedges and bamboo. That's something that we've seen some of our residential properties on lakes. They're putting that bamboo fence all the way down to the property line. So we've written language to kind of curtail some of that.
Even like open fences?
4 feet, so it's
Like a chain link fence? that's
chain
5
link.
foot,
Yeah, so it would have to,
30 feet back?
yeah.
Is there a height restriction on natural vegetation used along?
So right now, there is not a height restriction. So if you are 30 feet from the water line, it would be a 4-foot high natural vegetation.
I know somebody that wanted to plant a species of bamboo along his fence because there's 2-story apartments that grew 120 feet tall.
Yeah, so you can, if it's not adjacent to a water body, we have not addressed that, and people do use the bamboo as a visual. This is just adjacent to the water body.
My concern to him, I told him you're in the flight path of the airport. Seriously.
That is true, they do, we have a height regulation, so.
Well, what about Caspian with did we tell them to plant stuff right in front of their thing that's 10 feet high?
I believe they were behind the water
Yeah,
line.
They got, what is the water management? They got involved in reviewing it.
So we have a shoreline protection ordinance,
Sure.
and
They got
they,
involved.
the shoreline protection folks, yeah.
So that would apply there.
And then this is something that we found as a kind of something we didn't have in our code. We didn't allow fences on vacant lots, so now we are allowing the chain link or privacy fences were now permitted on vacant lots. So that's kind of a loophole that we are fixing. So that concludes all of the changes that we're making. So if you guys have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Yeah.
And Larry may elbow me on this because he's an engineer and I went to law school because I am a math atheist. But getting back to the triangles, when I was reading that language, and it says, I'm looking at page 263, sub 3 there in line 4977, 78. The visual clearance triangle must be 15 feet. 15 feet, what, in area or per side, or what, or so the 15 and the 25, what are those measurements describing?
Each side.
Length or area, or?
Yes, so that is the sides of the triangle. So
Okay.
not the hypotenuse, which is the diagonal, but the two sides of the triangle.
Okay. That answers that, thank you.
Any other questions?
Are you, well, you've basically taken half of our agenda off every week, so have anything, anything that we've done that have denied people's side setbacks Are you expecting any retroactive applications because now we've changed the code? How does that work? You know, there's been many cases where we haven't allowed 5 foot, you know, and now when the code goes into effect, will those people basically be able to just walk in and say, I want to move my fence down to 5 feet and get administrative approval?
No.
Why not?
Because our decision was based on the law at the time.
But understand, if they put in a new application and say, I'm moving my fence to 5 feet, it's part of the code now, why wouldn't they be allowed?
If it's part of the
For
code,
example,
they
like,
don't have to
let's say someone decriminalizes marijuana. Those prior convictions are still convictions unless there's some other enabling legislation to undo that. And it's
Is that a fact? I mean, that people can't come back even though they got denied?
Well, they could come in and apply for a new permit.
That's what I'm saying. They would apply for
They would have to
a
go
new
through
permit.
the process.
Yeah, they just can't move it, understood. Yeah, they could come back and put a new application in.
Yeah, but they start the process all over new. They can't say.
Correct, but
The law's
in
changed,
this case, though,
Yeah.
basically it's staff approval. They don't have to come, it's not a variance request anymore.
Oh, that's different.
That, I would, that's my understanding, but our attorneys
Yeah,
did
I
leave, you couldn't just go and say, hey, you know.
No, I understand. It's still a process. They still have to come back and.
And I will tell you, fences are not cheap, so I'm not sure if somebody just spent, a couple $1,000s on a fence, and they're not gonna come tear that down and put up a brand new one.
Oh, I'd move it myself.
We can say no, and they can apply again and apply again and apply again if they want to pay the money,
They got, what, like a 1 year they got to wait between applications?
something like that.
Any other questions or, and just so, for your education, we are going to the board on May 23rd. This is the entire LDC that we are going to be looking at, but, we hope to have finally this wrapped up by the end of the year, have these new regulations in place.
I made a few more grammar nerd notes.
Okay, yeah.
I'll probably just email you and.
Yeah, that's fine,
obviously
and we
respond.
are doing that, and we are doing a page-by-page review of each page, so please, especially the grammar ones, I greatly appreciate those.
How does, on 264, sub-paragraph P, talks about the grade elevations where now the height of the fence will be determined based on the elevation of the highest adjacent property?
I'm sorry, can you?
P, it says where grade elevations along adjoining property lines differ, that the fence wall height shall be measured from the finished ground elevation of the property having the higher ground elevation.
Yes, we have that problem where, somebody thinks they're getting a 6-foot fence, but then when it actually comes in, it ends up being a 4-foot fence because of the elevation. So
Right.
that allows you that kind of, you may end up, it may on paper be a 8-foot fence, but it appears to the neighbors to be that 6-foot fence.
So if I'm on the high side and I need a 6-foot fence, I can put 8 foot to get my 6 foot, but the neighbor gets an 8-foot fence.
They would, because what we're hearing is that people are wanting that visual barrier.
Sure.
So they're saying, well, they only could put in a 6-foot fence, but because of the change in elevation, we're effectively only getting a 4-foot fence.
Correct. So in a case like that, then where somebody would come to us, ask for a variance to put an 8-foot fence when it only requires a 6-foot fence, staff would look at it and say, well, you have 2 foot of difference in your property, so yes, an 8-foot fence is acceptable, and we wouldn't see it.
Yes.
The other thing we see is somebody goes and builds a multi-story building behind them, and all of a sudden, they don't like them looking in right into the house, but how high can the fence go to block the
No, and that,
That's,
and because that's not a grade elevation
No, that's
change,
a
so
construction issue.
that would have to come to y'all for,
Right.
to
but that's a common
Yeah.
complaint.
Yeah, we hear that one too.
That's where the guy wanted to plant the bamboo. He had a solution.
Is there anything else?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. That was on me. All right, last thing on the agenda. When I originally requested this, I wanted to talk about, take a moment. It seems that, fences are vain. They come up over and over, and we have some definite opinions on fences. Not just this current board, but even extended back when Mike was there, he had strong opinions. I have some fairly strong opinions.
Well, they just codified his objection, so it's all.
Well, well, what I don't want to do is, in the interest of, I don't want to, every single time we have a hearing, keep voicing the exact same thing over and over and over, if we can have a discussion and at least say what we need to say now. Now, that doesn't mean that you may not find a need to say something in your objection or whatever, but if we got discussion to have, let's do it now while we're together. And because we had one meeting, I swear, that meeting went almost 3 hours and it was all fences.
I think your point's well taken, and I think about this because usually I'm the obnoxious one on the subject, but
It's not always you, sometimes it's me, I admit it.
I'll go for usually.
And we don't always use the adjective obnoxious on you, so.
Thank you, I appreciate that. I'm making progress. But I feel like the applicant is, I feel like there's part of me wants to say, guys, you know how I feel, and blah, there we go on. But I feel like that applicant has a right to know.
Okay.
If I'm saying for the 10 millionth time, I feel like we're getting balkanizations in neighborhoods, that guy's never heard me say it before, and they have the right to know why I'm saying no to something. And but to your point, that is, you guys are, I mean, that's my concern is that we have these little small PD neighborhoods, and they say, okay, here are the rules of the game and how it can be built. Someone comes in, buys property within that neighborhood, and then immediately afterwards, a bunch of people start saying, I don't care about any about this, I want my fence. And the philosophy of the land development code goes out the window. The philosophy of property rights of people who bought into that PD go out the window just because we all want to say, I don't see the big deal of it. And so that's kind of where I come from.
Okay.
If you didn't pick up from my subtle hint when I asked Desmond about putting a code reason on our denials, not versus a personal opinion, that was for you, sir.
Yeah. I heard it disregarded it, so yeah.
Okay, yeah, all right.
There you go.
Thank you for coming.
So, one of the things we gotta remember is just because somebody asks for a variance doesn't mean they're entitled to it.
Exactly.
That we've had people on the board in the past that felt, well, and they'd say, they asked, so I think we should give it to them. That is not in accordance with what the law and land development code says. We don't always do a good job of bringing out what the hardship is. A lot of times it's I want it. I paid for it, I want it.
I think we've gotten better, though, in asking. I think
No.
we have definitely gotten better with asking and the reasoning coming out more into public. I'd say in the beginning when I first came on, yeah, but I'd say it's gotten a lot better now in with that now.
Sure, but
So let me ask you the opposite question, though. Just because someone objects because they just don't like it,
no,
do they have a right to say we deny it because of that reason?
Right.
I'll tell you why I say that. A lot of my thinking comes in, there's a thing out there in the law, in Florida statutes, Chapter 70, it's the Harris Act. And it's a lot of times known as eminent domain right. And it picks up on that general idea that everybody has an investment-backed expectation for the use of their property. And that if government, we are government, and if government is going to come in and modify someone's investment-backed expectation for the use of their property, they should have a cause of action. So as the person who has the property rights, philosophically, reasonable minds can disagree, but philosophically, if someone says, I bought this property. Seminole County says this is what the land development code. Seminole County says if you want to change it, you must meet this 6-part test. And if in response to all of that, you have a board that just says, you seem like a nice guy, I like you, this is a pretty project, have at it. That seems to get in the way of that philosophical approach of that investment-backed expectation, that property right. So that's where I come from in that scenario.
Well, my point was, though, so if somebody just says, I want a fence there, it's mine, I paid for it, I want a fence, I am very unlikely to be moved much by that. If somebody sits there and they want a fence fairly close to the sidewalk or street, but they can actually articulate a valid reason, a good argument for it, I'm much more likely to say, you know what, I'm good with that. I've actually seen Mr. Hadaway vote in favor of some fences fairly close to a sidewalk, which I thought for sure he was going to say, no way, and he'd say, and he made the motion to approve it, I almost fell out of the chair. So I think he's also sometimes swayed by the fact that they had an argument.
Everything is different. All the situations and cases are different that we hear, which is why we which is why it's great to hear the homeowners speak. Because everything is different. So, and I'm the same way. I voted down some as well. And usually I'm all for, the fences, but now I'm kind of, looked more into it.
So,
Yeah, you know me, I usually don't have a hard time with those, except when they go to the absolute minimum, when they want a zero, that kind of, when I look at the criteria that, is it the least amount or the minimum amount of variance that.
Absolutely.
And that's the criteria I would use. But in this case, it will change because now we've given them, instead of 25 foot or 15 foot, whatever the building setback line is, they can go 5 feet. If that's what I'm reading, 5 feet, is the minimum. To me, anything that requests beyond that is going to change my philosophy completely, 100%, because there is new requirements that allows them the ability to move.
Once the ordinance passes, I will not base a decision on a proposed ordinance. That could change.
And that was going to be my next question. When does the ordinance potentially get approved?
Oh, May for the BCC, for the final approval. Because
And then when does it actually go into effect? Is it October?
No.
Oh, in May?
Yeah, it's immediate.
So between now and May, any meetings that we have, that we would have an indication where we might have is staff going to recommend that the people wait until, see if it's codified, or is it?
I can tell you, we have been advising applicants that they do have options, that an option is that we possibly are going to have an ordinance that's going to change what we're saying no to you now, but it may change, so.
Yeah.
The interesting part is they'll make the argument, well, there should be, I know what the code says, but what allowance do we give them past that? Well, now they're giving them 5 feet, and people are going to want 0 feet.
But see, to me, I having no choice, either the building setback line or nothing, having a variance, versus now having an option to go up, you can go up to this point, makes my decision-making a lot more easier, so.
Well, I'm going to try to do a better job of having them state what their hardship is. I need you to clearly tell me what your hardship is.
Fair.
And if they, and honestly, if all they can tell me is, I just want it because I bought it, I'm not much inclined to be moved by that. Because everybody wants it that paid the money to be here. It's pricey to get a variance.
Well, it's like saying, why can't I drive 50 miles an hour in the school zone? I don't see what the problem is, and it's like, well, no.
Well, now get caught.
Well, sure, yeah. But the flip, just to talk out of both sides of my mouth, though, the flip side, though, is I've represented people before, Orange County and City of Orlando's versions of us, and they can be so harsh, and they take nothing into consideration. They say, we're going to say yes, no switch on all 6 criteria, and that doesn't quite seem so fair either, so.
Right, if you ever been to Helen, Georgia, beautiful, looks like the Swiss Alps up there, they give almost 0 variances ever. They're very strict on their codes, and that's just the way it is. So yeah, no, it goes both ways. I don't believe we should be just automatically permissive, but I don't think we should be rigidly strict either. We're here as a buffer to give the citizen a chance, for fairness in the application of the code. But we need to make them prove their point.
I'll say, I've disagreed with y'all more than anyone, is that I've never felt like the point was, I've always felt the point was always fairly debatable. Sure. I would say, okay, I disagree, but I see your point always. And I don't think you guys make arbitrary or just off the cuff decisions.
I mean, my big pet peeve with them is, the more I look, the more I see that tunneling effect Mike used to talk about. When he first started talking about it, it really never dawned on me until I started really paying attention. I go, he's not wrong. I looked at fences that we approved as a plan. But to me, even worse is I can tell you, riding bicycles through this county, there's a lot of places without bike lanes, and you get forced onto the sidewalk or get killed, and you got walls and fences that are touching the sidewalk, and telephone poles in the middle of the sidewalk that you're trying to. And I just think we also got to be careful that we have safety risks too, that we don't want to cause somebody to get hurt because we didn't ask enough questions.
Understood.
Yeah. Anything else for the good of the order?
I enjoy serving with you guys. I really do.
I do too.
And I love our staff. I see a lot of jurisdictions, and I love home the best.
Well, I've been doing this almost a dozen years now because I enjoy it. This is my last year, though. I'm retiring next year, so I promised my wife I'd be free. So she wins.
Unless you annoy her in the intervening time.
And she does me in and I don't show up for a meeting, that's because she killed me. I need an investigation, don't believe the note. Okay. I will not kill myself. I don't care what she says. I want the children investigated too. From all in prison. Y'all have a good night. Yes, sir. Meeting's adjourned.